Thanks so much. It's nice going after Jeremy because everyone's here after seeing the cool variable stuff, so you're just like leftovers and staying. I appreciate that. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming along. My name is Vincent Chan, so I make work under the moniker Matter of Sorts. I'm also a PhD candidate at Monash University in Melbourne. This is the first time speaking at ATypI for me, so I just wanted to quickly say thanks to the conference organisers, and I'm not sure who actually decides who speaks, but the powers that be, thanks for the opportunity to talk today. Okay, so I'm going to shift the tone quite a bit from Jeremy and Leon's presentation of emerging technology to something a little more esoteric and probably a lot less cool. My intention is to talk through some ideas I've been wrestling with as I've been thinking about releasing retail typefaces into the world. Specifically, I'm hoping to make some sense of the relationships between price, value, quality, and accessibility. I want to unpick the nature of typefaces, their formation, how they operate in the world, their worth or value as both commercial and cultural entities, and the implications this might have for how we conceive of a financial signifier. I should be clear at the outset that the following proposition is speculative. It exists as a kind of imperfect gesture towards an alternative. By no means stating that other players should adopt a similar approach necessarily, simply that these are a particular set of notions that have been rattling around in my brain for some time and may be useful as a provocation of sorts. I've titled the talk the birth, life, and death of letters, the reason for which should become clear by the end. The drier, more pragmatic and verbose subtitle is a speculative dynamic pricing model for digital typefaces, but I won't be talking about typefaces for the first half. I'd like to begin rather tangentially by introducing a key reference point for me in the form of an essay penned by American curator Anthony Huberman. The first iteration of his text was called I Do Not Love Information and was published in After All magazine in 2007. Later that year, it was slightly amended and republished in issue 15 of an offbeat arts and culture journal called ... which we see here. Many of you I'm sure will know. This particular iteration was rechristened Naive Set Theory. The title page co-opted the cover of an undergraduate mathematics book of the same name by a Hungarian mathematician called Paul Halmas. So I'm going to take a little time to tease out some of his ideas, reading a fair amount of the text directly, so please bear with me. So Huberman begins by introducing this simple diagram, plotting curiosity as a function of information. He explains, a total absence of information about a given subject usually solicits no curiosity. Without awareness of its existence, we can't possibly care about it. 2, when we come to realize the existence of something we never knew was there before, our curiosity is sparked. What is it? How does it work? What should we call it? Why is it there? But we remain in the early stages of our ability to recognize and read it. 3, we attempt to accumulate information. While additional research provides many answers, it also reveals additional questions, fueling more curiosity still. 4, at a certain point at the top of the bell curve, we come to a place where effective discussion and debate is possible, but much still remains speculation. It's a moment of intense scrutiny and educated hypothesizing, when questions, answers, contradictions, controversy, desire, violence, disappointment, and determination make up a complex system. 5, little by little, though, speculation gives way to consensus. The power structures that make up the socio-political fabric begin enforcing their choices. The many questions gather around common answers, and information becomes more and more organized, making the transition into the understood. 6, sinking into the understood, our given subject provokes less and less curiosity. And 7, eventually we have a dictionary definition. I presume, and this is Huberman speaking, few would argue that the experience of art thrives at the top of the bell curve in a place of speculation and not consensus, hypothesis and not conclusions, and belief and not knowledge. To stay at the top of the bell curve corresponds to a state of sustained curiosity that provokes us to change something about ourselves in an effort to understand. To stay at the top of the bell curve, as our diagram clearly shows us, requires stopping information. Huberman goes on to highlight the ways in which the sheer volume and proliferation of information in contemporary life undermines the desire of artists to court conjecture, criticality, imagination, and departure. He then walks through these 4 strategies that artists have recently adopted to get in between the flow of information, causing it to malfunction in order to surf the top of the curve. And I'll walk through those briefly now. No. So Huberman actually starts with a tactic outside of his diagram. No information is the simple act of refusal or secrecy. It's the strategy of punk, as well as that used by the situationist, to strategically withdraw, to not work, to not play the game. By disengaging, information is severed, or rather, it never takes root. Huberman notes that there is potential for a double bind in this move, though. Overt opposition has in many ways been co-opted by capitalism and is something marketable, fashionable, causing no information to become its own kind of information. And here he cites how Hollywood loves the Sex Pistols. Getting around this paradox, the Australian anthropologist Michael Taussig, writing on the subject of shamanist magic, explains the real skill of the practitioner lies not in skilled concealment, but in the skilled revelation of skilled concealment. Hence, power flows not from masking, but from an unmasking, which masks more than masking does. Confusing indeed. So, in the end, yes can also be a form of no. Too much information. So the first maneuver is the one used by Spartacus to obstruct the truth. As the story goes, a Roman centurion attempts to identify the leader of the slave rebellion, and one by one, each and every individual steps forward announcing, "I am Spartacus." This very technique is often used by artists through pseudonym. So the French poet and critic Stéphane Mallarmé publishes the journal La Dernière Mode, writing all the articles himself, but signing each one with a different female alias. Or the more contemporary example of the electronic musician Richard D. James, who also makes work under Aphex Twin, AFX, Blue Cox, Bradley Strider, Martin Pressender, Caustic Window, GAC, Soy PP, Polygon Window, Power Pill, Q-Castic, Diceman, Tanaya Russell, and DJ Smudgeface. Not enough. So the not enough approach allows participation, but only to a point. Huberman cites artists of the 60s and 70s, such as Ed Richet, who tells us he's taking pictures of gas stations and does that and nothing more. Bruce Nauman's work Jump shows him jumping. The information is there, but it has nothing to do, nowhere to go. Huberman also provides the example of curatorial strategies where exhibitions have been centered simply around the color red, or artists whose last names start with W. Not enough is a deadpan, straight-laced one-liner, but nothing more, a sudden stoppage, a hard cut. Disperse. Dispersed information is information spread too thin. Like the broken telephone game, it welcomes slippage and mistranslation, and in fact it often relies on it. Dispersion proliferates information and relishes in its relinquished control, its compromised authority. Huberman mentions the phenomenon of a rumour, a piece of punctured information. Orson Welles famously disperses War of the Worlds and causes worldwide panic. The final tactic is private information. By intentionally limiting circulation and generating smaller quantities, information finds only the concerned and the committed. Artists have found appeal in this as it requires persistence, real engagement. Huberman acutely states it's the opposite of the internet. Some galleries, for instance, purposely do not have websites, do not engage forms of social media. It's not to say they're being exclusive, simply limiting their output. It isn't a rejection of a network, but rather a confidence in autonomy. So Huberman concludes his text with a string of pithy statements. There are things that we like, i.e. we like the fact that we like them. There are things that we like that we don't like, i.e. we like the fact that we don't like them. There are things that we don't like that we like, i.e. we're a little embarrassed that we like them. And then there are things that we don't like that we don't like. Those are the ones that stay poignant and relevant. Those are the ones we don't understand. So how does a curator's essay on information relate to type design and typography? Huberman's simple diagram has been for a long time sitting in the back of my mind, and when I started to think through the pricing of my own retail typefaces, its elegant, albeit oversimplified logic seemed to resonate. So let's consider some potential correlations by asking the following basic questions. What are typefaces exactly? What is their nature? What relationships enable them, give them life, and see them proliferate in the world? How is value conferred on them, and are they immutable? Does their cultural capital change over time? And how should price align to these qualities whilst enabling access and, of course, allowing one to pay the bills? As we all know, a digital letter form is merely a rendering of a set of coordinates and instructions. Today, fonts act as small pieces of software able to be replicated verbatim at next to no cost. They, like information, are disembodied. They come hard-coded with a so-called voice, a collective understanding of how forms align to moods, cultural signifiers, ideologies. Fonts share qualities with that of a spectre or ghost. They lie dormant on servers and hard drives until summoned by the designer, where through each instance of their use, they colour content and are coloured in return. Their release into the public sphere with all the type designers' marvellous intent opens them up to have their intended meanings reinforced, amalgamated, or subverted. We might already start to see alignments between Haberman's ideas and how typefaces move through the world. Forms seem to traverse time, distorted, interpreted, revived, pirated, extended, debased. Multiplicities of letter forms create alternate narratives, cultural faux pas, and ideological love children. Current pricing models often don't reflect these complexities, instead borrowing from the physical realm and the mechanics of a standard economic model, which is to say, more often than not, wherever you are in the world, the typeface is presented as an immutable entity with a cost that is similarly fixed. We gesture towards some correlation between value and proliferation through workstation brackets. 1 to 3 computers might manage X amount of output, 30 to 39 considerably more so, but it's clearly an imperfect equation. This, of course, doesn't take into account the particularities around self-hosting versus subscription-based web font services and everything in between. End-user license agreements attempt to govern or put legal bounds around usage, but the slippery nature of software on circuits and servers work against these constraints. Underwear have recently shared their poetic insights on this matter with the Font Fiction project, where they pontificate that cats have 9 lives, but fonts can become immortal. And in terms of data, that may be so. Griffo's types breathe new life as a variable font. However, these letters still carry the cultural baggage of its time, and thus its frisson will never truly be resurrected. While fonts may be able to live forever, I suppose it begs the question whether a font should live forever, and at what point a font might move from a commercial good, as in goods and services, to a cultural good, as in something that is owned by all. FontStan's innovative rental model is a welcome alternative, and it's also worth mentioning the way Scribbletone and OnoType approach their Future Fonts project, leaning into the iterative nature of software development with early adoption and leveraging the idea of fonts as incomplete entities seems to conceptually align quite neatly. So what might a model look like that speaks to some of the qualities mentioned? As a kind of gesture that is part parody, I propose to co-opt the compellingly simple bell curve along analogous lines of thought. Instead of diagramming curiosity as a function of information, it would trace price as a function of licenses sold. The bell curve in mathematical terms is referred to as a Gaussian curve, and thus the Gaussian economic model traces the birth, life, and death of letters. Just as curiosity about a subject rises, peaks, and drops as information increases, the cultural capital of the typeface seems to trace a similar, though admittedly imperfect, line. New releases garner interest from first adopters. Through usage and exposure, further sales increase, some notion of peak popularity hits, and a typeface slowly begins a kind of sad decline. This, of course, is an oversimplified assessment, but a life cycle has its merits, one of which might balance the dual properties of a commercial and cultural good. Before you dismiss this farcical notion as folly, consider the following. To begin with, one would designate a projected revenue goal based on total production time for a new typeface plus profit margin. The simple mechanics of the function for a single workstation would operate as such. First license is given away for free. The second license is sold at a slightly higher price according to a Gaussian curve and the variables of maximum price and intended revenue. This low entry cost starts to increase demand and in turn drives the next price point. This roughly aligns to Haberman's initial peak in interest. What is it? How does it work? Each consecutive license increases in price, further fueling demand and more curiosity still. The designated maximum is met at the top of the curve where demand, price, and curiosity is at its highest point. In echoing the phenomenon of curiosity diminishing with an overload of information, the typeface is progressively discounted with each purchase. This aligns to the notion of market saturation and declining uniqueness. The final license costs nothing, having run its course, It sits at the end of the bell curve, and the typeface is left as a gift to the world, a free cultural good, part of the public domain. This use of dynamic pricing is a common practice in e-commerce, where businesses utilize the seasonal or even daily ebb and flow of demand to maximize profit. The proposed Gaussian model, however, is mirrored to effectively short-circuit the prevailing logic of capitalism, that of maximizing profit. Conventional typeface pricing also generally fails to take into account the relative price of goods for different nations. If we were to take $50 as a starting point for a single style, single computer license, and consider this is often a fixed price wherever you are in the world, we might realize that this quickly advantages and disadvantages certain people. The Economist in 1986 came out with their Big Mac Index as a way to discuss the notion of purchasing power parity. The cost of a Big Mac in the US is roughly $4.80, give or take, which means a single style for an individual is equivalent to 10 Big Macs. In Switzerland, however, $50 converts to roughly 48.5 Swiss francs. The cost of a Big Mac in Geneva, though, is close to 6.5 francs, making the price of a single style equivalent to only 7 Big Macs. The political dimension to this discrepancy becomes evident when you look at a nation like Turkey, where $50 equates to 330 Turkish lira. The cost of a Big Mac in Istanbul is closer to 9 Turkish lira, meaning that a single style is equivalent to 35 Big Macs. So for a student or individual freelancer, if you're on the Big Mac diet, it'll cost you 35 meals, while your American friend only pays 10 meals worth. To remedy this, the equation would adjust for this discrepancy, normalizing the relative values of currency, reaching toward a more even playing field. Furthermore, this location specificity attempts to ensure that prices remain relatively affordable for students and individual designers, regardless of where they're located. For a single user license, each call made to the formula would recalculate the maximum variable relative to an index such as the poverty line in that nation, making access to tools a priority. This, of course, is a core distinction that sits in contrast to a model of infinite fixed profit, a model that has little correlation with the way typefaces function in the world and that lacks resonance with the nature of digital assets. The Gaussian function instead ensures that profit is made by spreading out purchases according to location and taking into account the life cycle of popularity. Revenue is cumulatively constructed of a multitude of price points. So what might this look like in practice? I'm currently working with a developer to realize some of these ideas, and these screenshots give a brief preview. So hovering over each typeface would provide the user with a current price, depending on where the font might be in its life cycle. One thing to note is that this early iteration follows a parabola rather than a bell curve, but the principle remains. Going into specific font pages, the user can select their country, where the prices would be recalculated according to an index, such as the poverty line, as well as being normalized using purchasing power parity data. As a byproduct of a transparent process and the prioritization of access to tools for all, the model may also reduce piracy. If a font is always reasonably priced according to a multiplier of the poverty line, the impetus to subvert the system becomes moot. The final consequence of the Gaussian model that I'd like to mention is that by mirroring the incline of demand at the halfway point, it intentionally severs the opportunity for ongoing passive income. The implication of this forced discounting ensures that the type designer does not become complacent in developing their practice. The acknowledgement of a font's life cycle and installment of a financial structure that reflects that relationship is a kind of reflexive tactic that promotes a generative ethic and gestures towards an alternative. It constitutes a method that consciously impedes and entangles the conventional expectations of a purely commercial typographic practice towards a more speculative orientation. By building in a degree of discomfort, by turning the tools of a discipline in on itself, and artificially limiting financial gain, I hope it might promote a discursive momentum and illustrate a way to escape calcification. Thanks.